and I want to welcome you to Trend Micro Spotlight session, where we aim to shine a revealing light on the hidden dangers lurking in today's digital world. In each of these sessions, we bring together some leading voices from cybersecurity, law enforcement, government, and advocacy organizations to share real-world insights and practical tips. My name is Marike Kuyper. I'm part of the consumer education team at Trend Micro. And today we're joined by Constable Brian Mason from the Edmonton Police Service. He's a member of the Police Electronic Response Team. After being injured in the line of duty in 2019, Brian was shifted to a desk role where he's dedicated himself to exploring and advancing the scope of fraud investigations with a particular focus on their global impact and connection to organized crime. Pretty fascinating stuff. Brian knows a lot about scams and fraud, particularly those affecting and targeting Canadians. So welcome, Brian. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, to be honest.
So perhaps we could start by understanding a bit more about the Police Electronic Response Team. Can you tell us what this team does on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. We were originally began as a COVID initiative. The service really started seeing a lot of issues as far as members going off sick because of COVID exposure when everything was under lockdown. And obviously, if you have an entire squad of individuals that are now confined to home, well, you're looking at a significant manpower problem. But the problem is that the calls for service are still racking up. So we needed that ability for the really what we were supposed to be providing our community to be actually engaged, but also, there's a resource that is untapped for people that could be doing investigations. And so this unit was actually started as a pilot project in order to start taking some of those calls for service. And so that the mandate is that anything that didn't need a physical police presence could still be investigated, but can be done remotely. So whether it's from a laptop or whether it's done from a division setting, things like that, that they can actually still do those investigations. And so we originally started with just doing information files because it was still in its infancy. I was part of that initial pilot project, and we just kind of kept pushing the envelope a little further and further. And now we really have the ability to take any call for service that does not require that presence. Everything from your package thefts all the way up to robberies and assaults, major frauds, things like that. All of it is done remotely from the division. If anything needs to be done outside of there, we can task other units, but we have that ability to actually do everything remotely and slowly work through things.
Sounds like it has a really broad scope to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. And that's why we really started taking a lot of the frauds, because those have a tendency of say log jamming the board, as everyone's tied up on a robbery in progress or stabbing, something like that, bomb calls. But the fraud that's going to take an inordinate amount of work, those tend to really kind of stack up because no one really has the ability to take them. But we do, because we're not beholden to the radio. So if a priority call comes in, we don't go rushing out to deal with it. We can actually start fresh, and we can go through it step by step.
So what inspired you in particular? Because it seems like you've got a particular focus on digital crime within law enforcement now. And so what inspired you to focus there?
Well, it was kind of a two-pronged approach on that. One, my background is I was studying as a archaeologist in the States, and obtained my degree there, and started working in the field a little bit before I moved up to Canada. And so my background and the way I work is very detail oriented. And fraud is nothing but detail, and it's nothing but finding those little tiny puzzle pieces and moving step by step. And when I started looking into a couple of these to see, okay, well, what can I really do with these? How can I really expand? Because I didn't like the idea of just going, call to call and doing the mundane thing. I wanted to really expand and see what I could do. But the thing is, as I started doing that, I actually started seeing the real impact that fraud actually has on people.
Mhm.
And I saw that the mindset that a lot of people had was that, well, it's the greasy fraud. No one really wants to do it. It's a victimless crime. All this, different adage that I keep hearing. And what I saw, it's not a victimless crime. It's not just some data stream going back and forth. There's no real difference between a person who's gotten stabbed on the street and they're actively bleeding out and a fraud victim. With stabbing, we can see it. Sure, I mean, there's a visible wound there. We have to, put pressure on. We have to stop that bleeding. But there's no difference with a fraud victim. They're just bleeding out in a different way. They're
Mhm.
losing their finances. They've lost their identity to where they can't get a home. They can't get a car. In a lot of cases, they can't even get a cell phone because their
Mhm.
identity's been so badly compromised. Well, what's the difference with them bleeding out financially or their emotional security than someone who's on the street? We can provide them medical care and take them to the hospital, get them patched up, and they're good. What about the fraud victim? There's things we can do with them. And if we're ignoring all of those and we're treating it as a victimless crime, well, that's a problem. And so it really kind of rang close to home for me in that regard. And I just wanted to see what I could do to help. And so that's why I started pushing the envelope.
I think that's wonderful because it sounds like you've got a real heart for the victims of these types of crimes and you have real empathy for what they're going through. And we definitely feel the same way that the impact of these types of crimes, fraud, scams, et cetera, can be everything from emotional to monetary, all the way through. It plays the whole gamut. So while it's not necessarily physical harm, the impact is still really great. So what type of online scams or fraud are you actually seeing most frequently, and how maybe has this changed over the past few years?
Well, a lot of what we're seeing right now are your investment scams and your job scams. Uh, those tend to be the biggest components right now. Crypto investment scams are one of the primary hallmarks of that, where they will lure people in to invest onto this crypto platform and slowly kind of pull money out of them, bleed them dry, or they'll invite them onto a different type of platform for a job potential, and then they start what I typically refer to as a task-based scam, so that they'll give them a series of tasks to complete as their job and they can earn commission off of it. But the problem is they have to invest into the platform in order to do that. And it looks enticing to a lot of people and they get, roped in, and these things can really drag on. In a lot of cases, we'll see either one of those types of scams operate, and they may go for, say, a period of 3 months. And within that 3 months, these people can abscond with, 1, 2, 3 million dollars easily.
Per victim?
No, no, globally in
Yeah.
Canada. In other countries, similar platforms can pull in actually higher amounts depending. But a lot of the ones that we see in Canada, they're raking in usually within the 1 to 3 month time frame, about 1 to 3 million.
So they really are playing the long game with the
Hmm.
victim.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. They slowly bleed them dry. Um, Typically, you'll see it in a lot of references as far as the pig butchering scams go, with a lot of your romance scams as well as your crypto investment scams. But they will just keep pulling more and more money out of individuals, starting with smaller payments, typically anywhere from, just depending on the victim's comfort, and they'll entice individuals uh, to see kind of how they're potentially going to invest. And so if they're not really sure, well, maybe we'll only get them on the hook for $500 for the first initial investment, get them onto the platform, and then the more they can get comfortable with them, they start getting the 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 or more, to where it's not uncommon. We'll see some victims will invest, $100,000, others upwards of 900,000 to $1 million each.
And I know you mentioned the term pig butchering. I know this is a term that's come out of China, sort of this idea of like fattening up a victim before, taking as much from them as you possibly can. It's a little bit of a shaming term, unfortunately. We don't really love that this is now the term we're using to describe this. But can you tell us just really briefly how this type of scam, this conversational social engineered scam, might get started, how it works?
Yep, absolutely. I'm of the same mindset. I don't like the term. I don't typically use it. Even in I did a charge packet just a while back. We did a press release a couple of weeks ago on a big investment scheme, task-based job scheme, which we laid charges on 5 individuals in BC. And but the term pig butchering, and for the scams that really it surrounds, is that you have an individual they are masterminds at social engineering and masters at manipulation. They will start conversations with someone, usually butter them up with either compliments or promises of these great returns, wonderful guarantees of investment, and will really court them on getting their confidence in whatever they're trying to do, or get their buy-in on that relationship with that one person. So say it's in a romance scam that they're wanting to run. Well, they just slowly start feeding those compliments, and the person's like, oh, well, this person really likes me, I trust them. As soon as that trust is gained, they start the scam, and they'll start slow at first so that the person isn't shocked, because if they start large, that person's going to easily be shocked and might run away. But if they start slow, that person's going to stay in, and they constantly give them just a little bit more encouragement, or the sense of urgency, things like that, where they'll start pulling more.
So
And
they really build trust and relationship, and how they're making those first few initial pieces of contact. There isn't this sort of what we see in email scams or text message scams. It's not that immediate, obvious tell that this is a scam. They're coming at this from a more benign form of communication and earning trust over a long period of time before the
oh,
ask.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
there's been times with some of these investigations that I have seen where they have talked with a victim for months before they ask for a single dime. And so by that time, the victim thinks, oh, well, this is my friend. This is someone I know. And we'll talk to them and be like, okay, well, is this someone that you know? Oh, yes, they're my friend. Have you ever met this friend in person? No. Okay.
Yeah.
How long have you been talking to him? Where did all this start? And yeah, when we look at the historical data, it's not uncommon for it to be 3, 4, 7 months prior, where they've just been carrying on a conversation, and then eventually there's the hook and they start the scam.
I'm glad we're talking about this, because I think it's some of the lesser known tactics for the general public. They're a little bit more aware of the things that they can immediately kind of pick out in their inbox, or pick out from the messages that they receive, et cetera. But this is something that is much sneakier in how it operates. And so I think it's one that doesn't often get the public's attention, or that they generally know about. So one question I have for you is, without revealing any sensitive details, can you give us an idea of how an investigation from your side, law enforcement, how that unfolds? So for instance, how do you trace like the digital footprints, or coordinate with other agencies, for example?
Mhm. It's a very, very good question. And this is one that I always try to explain to a lot of the individuals that I work with, as far as whether I'm investigating their file directly, or if I'm assisting another member with that file. I try to convey to them what sense of timeline they're looking at and what steps we're ultimately going to have to take, because I know it's a shock to everybody that it's not really like you see on CSI. These things are not completed in 24 to 48 hours. That doesn't happen. It takes a while.
Mhm.
So in sometimes our fastest return is about 6 months. Other times it can take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years sometimes to find every piece. But ultimately, what we have to do is we have to look at what data do we have now and what can be actioned off of that data. So within Canada, we're we're confined by the what it says in the Canadian Criminal Code as far as what we can actually do. So if say we're dealing with an investment scam where we know a platform online was used, we know there were telephone and emails involved, and there were payments that were made through. Okay, well, what kind of payments are we looking at? Were those payments in cryptocurrency? Were they done through a financial institution at a bank or a payment application system? Okay, so we know those things we can follow. Well, with all of those, if I go to a bank and say, "Hey, I want the banking information for this account," well, that bank's going to tell me to pound sand and come back for the warrant because it's private information. We cannot, as law enforcement, take that information for our our investigative use because the law says that that data belongs to the bank and to its client. So what I have to do is I have to sit down and I have to draft out a document. It's called an information to obtain. And what it is it's literally a story of the investigation that explains to a judge that here's what's happened, here's the crime that's been committed or that we suspect has been committed. And this is data that we know exists out there. And this is why we think we should have access to that data. And then we take that to the judge. Judge reads over it and says, "Yeah, that's acceptable," or "No." And if they think that that's acceptable, they sign off on the warrant. They hand it to us, and then we give that to whatever company we're looking at. Now that typically has a time frame attached to it of minimum usually about 30 days. Sometimes it can be even longer that that company actually has to produce the data. Once we get that, then we look at all the data we have. Now we're looking at the next line, and the process repeats over and over. Now, with it, we look at a variety of things from addresses, phone numbers. We look at IP addresses involved, and any kind of correlation point that we can have. So if we see a name pop up, well, we're going to then communicate with our external partners, other police agencies, either here in Canada or abroad, and say, okay, do you have any dealings with this individual? What about this address or this phone number? What do you have? And we do quite a bit of collaboration with other agencies, and we'll talk with agencies here in Canada. We'll talk with agencies in the U.S. Or wherever else. With the current digital age, we're seeing a lot more collaboration between agencies where we can actually talk with them. We can share data. We can move a lot more freely, and it really depends upon the country. Some of those agencies are in countries that are really bound by heavy restriction,
Mhm.
and so they can't really cooperate and talk to us as freely. But others, we can go to them and they're like, "Yeah, here you go. Whatever you need." Um, it's not uncommon for us to contact, say, a police agency in Australia or in the island nation of the Seychelles, and get cooperation out of them. And it's getting better. It still has a lot of steps to go
Mhm.
for that collaboration to be efficient to where we can actually get data faster.
Right, I was going to
It's
ask,
getting
like, does this
better.
collaboration with other entities, does it sometimes speed things up or can it complicate the investigative process?
Yeah, it can really go either way. Sometimes it will greatly enhance the process, especially if they are an agency or a country that will speak freely with us, then we can speed things up really fast. They may have the ability to get things with a much faster judicial process than we do. And so if they're able to provide us the data, great. Other times it's, for example, I had one where we sent a information package off to a country and they got back to me a year later.
Goodness,
Um,
that's a long
and by
wait.
that,
And as
yeah,
you're saying, investigations are taking longer than maybe victims would expect when they
yes,
report initially.
yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, if it goes, especially in the digital world, if it goes too long, we
Mhm.
may risk losing any potential data. Here in Canada, the mass majority of instances where we're going to be looking for data, we have a retention span of about 7 years. Um, your financial institutions and a lot of other companies will maintain the data for 7 years, sometimes a little longer. But if it goes past that 7 year mark, the chance of us getting any data is very small. Every now and then we do get lucky to where we'll get what we need, but yeah, otherwise, yeah, if it goes past that, because we're waiting on collaboration from someone else, well, unfortunately, we've lost that opportunity, and so we have to look at other avenues.
Yeah, you can only do, what's within your jurisdiction, and then you've got to wait for others to give
Yep.
you the information. So may I ask, how often do these types of investigations end in an arrest, for example? Is that common, not common?
With most of these, the the mass majority of them will end up in a warrant for the arrest. Now, whether or not it's a warrant we can action is another story. Uh, with a bunch of the scams we're seeing lately, the main scam is initiated outside the country, say either in Nigeria or China, Vietnam, Philippines, India, tend to be some of our high hitters right now. But they will usually have one or more entities that are inside Canada or at least in North America that are involved in the scam in some way, either as a money mule, so someone who's moving currency for the scammer themselves, and usually having or allowing them to use their financial accounts. Or there's going to be someone else, either someone who's involved in the direct chat, someone who's involved in account takeovers, et cetera, that's actually here in Canada or North America. And so in those cases, absolutely we can act on those. I find as far as a percentage wise for the files that I look into, I'd say maybe 50% of them actually have a player within North America. The other 50% are purely overseas and not really anything we can action. My stance on it as of right now is even if it's in a place we can't action, a
Mhm.
place that say doesn't really cooperate with us, then there's nothing that says we can't send some intelligence information off through Interpol to let everyone else know that, hey, this individual does scams. And we can still put out local warrants here so that in the event they ever try to come to Canada, we can deal with them.
You can have
Uh,
them. So for those scams that are like the scammers are located internationally, and maybe for that percentage where there isn't a player, an actor who's in North America or within Canada, within your jurisdiction, does the information that you share ever lead to arrest by authorities within that country, for example, within the Philippines or within Vietnam or within China?
Sometimes it depends upon the country. And it really honestly depends upon uh, the file and how it goes. So in some of these countries, there's a high level of corruption, and so if you have a a member in, we'll say Lagos, Nigeria, who goes to do a door knock to look for our suspect and do an arrest based upon intelligence information we have. If that person is just does a door knock, says, well, how much do you have on you? And just takes a bribe, well,
Mhm.
we're all done.
Yeah.
Every now and then we do see something actioned. We usually won't hear about it. I had a I had a very good circumstance with a romance scam where we knew it was perpetrated by 5 individuals in Lagos, Nigeria. And I sent an information package through Interpol to Nigeria, and I never heard anything back. My complainant, on the other hand, got a phone call from the scammer who was very angry because he had just done 6 months in prison in Nigeria off of that scam. We had no idea. It was the scammer who let our complainant know that he got arrested. So,
Well, it must be great to hear sometimes that at least there's something actionable happening,
yeah.
and taking place. That I'm sure everybody listening would be, heartened to know that there are consequences taking place for these scammers. But it sounds like the deck is stacked against us in a sense that because they're crossing international borders, you're very reliant on other countries taking action, and it's not necessarily within your direct power to take action against the criminals. That must not feel so great sometimes.
No, and it's honestly it's very frustrating for victims, and
Mhm.
that's where like we as investigators have to definitely make sure that we're wearing multiple hats at the same time, because it's one thing for me to sit here and surf through upwards of 4,000 plus pages of data
Mm.
for an investigation and just look at it as hard data and look at the hard facts and look at my role as being the one to find who did it and make sure the bad guys held accountable. I also have the role as being a public servant of ensuring that the victim is taken care of. So let's pull back to what I had mentioned earlier about the stabbing victim. We take them
Mhm.
to hospital to get treatment and care. What about the fraud victim? I can find the person who did it, just like I can find the person who did the stabbing, but I also have to make sure that I deal with the care as well. And that's where we have to make sure that the victims understand that, okay, yeah, our hands may be tied here, but here's what we can try and do. Here's what we can try and help mitigate, put them into connection with services, or just say, hey, we know that they're not going to be held accountable there, but we're going to put as much information out as we can. We're going to expose them as much as we can with the international community, with our partners that we work with. And on the off chance that they come here, this is what we can do. Um, it's it's not enough. It's not ever going to be enough because their personal space has been violated. Their personal identity has been violated, and in some cases, their entire lives have been ruined. But we have to try and do whatever we can. And even honestly, if it's sometimes just sitting on the phone with them or sitting in person with them and just listen to them, get it out, get it off their chest and rant and rave for half an hour, that's okay. Because at the end of the
It
day,
sounds like support of victims that come forward is just as important to you as also the investigation side.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because at
Are
the end of the
there
day, they are a victim.
Are there any particular resources or programs that you point them toward, toolkits or special organizations for Canadians who are dealing with this? They have been victims, they're going through it.
Yes, definitely. So there's there's a number of different things that we'll do depending upon what the issue is. So if there's anything in relation to identity fraud or um, their personal credit, things like that, we'll always refer them to one of two types of services. You have paid services for identity and credit monitoring, as well as free services. Um, I always recommend that regardless of circumstances, people sign up for one or both of those. I myself use it. I, thankfully, knock on wood, have not been the victim of an identity scam. But in the event I am, I will know about it because I have credit and identity protection, currently running. Paid services, you have Equifax and TransUnion. They're fantastic at what they do. But then you also have free services such as Credit Karma and Experian. And a quick Google search will be able to find all of those for you. Tips on that with anyone: if you do a Google search for something, don't click on a sponsored link. Scroll down, find the unsponsored link, and go from there. Because every once in a while, a Googled sponsored link is actually an ad sponsor from a scam site. So be
And
very
so for
careful
those
with
who
that.
don't know, obviously you get those links at the top of your search engine. They're the ones that are paid for by, as you're saying, could be a scammer, could be legitimate business that's just trying to put their information at the top of the page, but you're suggesting scroll down further, get beyond the sponsored links.
Yeah, it's always better to be safe than sorry. You can look at the sponsored links later on, but just you have to have a lot more scrutiny with those. The Otherwise, there's a lot of resources available, as long as you're looking on the trusted sources. So the Internet Crime Complaint Center, operated by the FBI, so it's ic3.gov, is a great resource for people. There's lots of good information releases on there that'll explain what different types of scams are, and get you through that process, as well as the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center. They have a lot of resources on their website, and both of those are extremely good and I always encourage people who have been the victims of scam, report to both. Even if you're in Canada, you can still report your scam to IC3 because it puts it in their database. And this is a big important point for all of us when we're looking for trends, that we know what's going on. Other resources
Helping
that
to give law enforcement some visibility on the landscape.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the biggest thing is, if we don't know about it, well, we can't look into it. We
Yeah.
don't know if we don't know what's happening, then there's nothing to look into. And the only way we're going to know what's happening is if people tell us about it. It can be a scary thing. It can be intimidating, and for a lot of people, they might face or feel a sense of shame. But there's no shame about it. These guys are master manipulators, just like what we talked about earlier. They know what they're doing. This is their job, their full-time job, and they're good at it. If they weren't good at it, you wouldn't have people like me getting paid to do what I do. I'd love the fact if I suddenly didn't have a need for a job. If they said, we don't need you anymore because there's no more scams. Great, that's wonderful. I'm more than happy to now put my resume up. Sure, it'd be a bad day for me financially, but that's fine. At the end of the day, it'd be great if there wasn't a need for that. But other ways that people can really start looking to protect themselves, there's website checkers out there that'll give you an indicator if it's a scam. One that I frequently use is scamadvisor.com. And you can look on there. It'll tell you potentially if the website's a scam or not. If you have been the victim of a remote desktop connection scam, so it's where these usually these tech scammers, they'll get you to download a program, and then they will start moving your mouse around to show you how your computer's been hacked. It hasn't been hacked. People who are on there are actually hacking your system at that point. There is a program that people can download. It's called Seraph Secure. It's SERAPH secure.com. That is a program that people can download, and it's free, and it will actually cut out all of those connections, so that their device will now be secure. Another one that they can check out is a password and account checker that I always recommend people do to see if there's a data breach that's going on with that email or password. And it's a difficult one for me sometimes to pronounce, but if you look at, if you go into your Google and you type in, have I been pwned.com, you'll be able to find it. And that's a great resource just to see if there is a data breach and see if you need to change your password, which I
Mhm.
always recommend people do at least
Yeah,
every
I
6
think that's
months.
standing for pwned, which is like
Yeah.
the industry term for, yeah, you've been hacked.
Yep.
So just to plug, we've got some wonderful free tools as well at Trend Micro. So you were talking about a URL checker. Trend Micro has one as well. It's a global site safety checker, and it's free to the general public. They can copy and paste a URL into there and just see if a website might be potentially a scam. But you're right, there's great security software out there that you can get that would tell you if you're landing on a malicious website, that maybe the ad you're seeing is a scam. Trend, for example, has one where you can literally take a screenshot of anything on your phone and it will automatically check and tell you, yes, this is looking like a conversation that's a scam, an ad that's a scam, etc. As well as for those romance scams that you were mentioning, there's deepfake inspector that would look to see, hey, is the image of the video that I think I'm talking to somebody who is a love interest, for example, and I don't realize that the video is manipulated by some AI tools in the back end. So we do have software that would detect that that's a deep fake and alert you to that
Mhm.
eventuality. Yeah. So can you tell me, as we're kind of wrapping up, one of the things I'd love to hear is just, do you have a memorable case that you've worked on that you could maybe tell us a little bit about? You seem to have a real heart for these victims that come forward. So maybe there's one that you could describe for us and just tell us how that unfolded and what happened in the end.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I guess one that really has stuck with me for quite some time. And it's one that I keep regular tabs on, even though we've completed the investigation. It's done. Um, Back in 2022, I took a romance scam, and it had been going on for quite some time. The initial the initial plant with that was there was an individual that had actually come to Canada from the Philippines and befriended a elderly lady here in Edmonton, and had said, well, I'm unfortunately being deported. I want you to check in on this friend of mine over WhatsApp. And so gave this lady a contact to follow on WhatsApp. And this contact, very quickly started saying, "Oh, well, you sound like a wonderful individual. I want to get to know more about you." And they really started developing a relationship over WhatsApp. And that went on for about 3 to 4 months. And then it was suddenly, oh, well, like, I really want to meet you, but I have this hurdle that I need to go over. I think the initial one was that they had some kind of customs fee that they were supposed to pay, and started asking for money. And the money was initially through uh, gift cards, and then it was transitioning over into wire transfers, and then into crypto and a bunch of other platforms. And what they were often doing was that our victim here was actually sending money to another victim that was being manipulated by this same individual running the exact same scam on someone.
Mhm.
And so that other victim was thinking, oh, well, now I'm getting, this for my love, overseas, and then sending it off through there. And so it was this this large web of money mules.
Very
And
complicated the way they'd set it up.
yeah, very much so. Because that's
Mhm.
typically what they'll do is they'll have victim A send money to victim B, who then sends it off to potentially an actual money mule, someone who's culpable, and sending them the payments through, and it eventually goes to our main target.
Wow.
And they very slowly kind of developed that relationship and kept getting more and more money. And the deeper our victim got into it, the more desperate they got. And
Mhm.
so the scammer could see that. And so they started playing on that fear. They started playing on that urgency.
Mm.
And after about a year and a half of them being involved in this scam, our victim had lost about $220,000.
And I'm sure that was an important amount of money for that victim.
It was.
Mhm.
She had exhausted every bit of financing she had. She actually remortgaged her home for
Oh,
this
wow.
scammer. And you're talking about a person who's living on a pension at this point.
Mhm.
They're in their 70s. So remortgaging a home that you had paid off, and now you also have a tremendous amount of credit card and line of credit debt on top of that. So their ability to try and repay these debts is very, very small.
Mhm.
Um, and when you're considering that's one victim, now remember how I was saying victim A, victim B? Yeah, there were several. They were all being wrapped up in the same scam. And I I continued to work with our victim, and uh, she would keep sending money to this individual because she was just extremely lonely. Even while we were doing the investigation and digging into as much data as we could, she was still sending money to this individual, all because she was lonely. Ultimately, what we found, we traced all of the cryptocurrency payments that were going through, all of the wire transfers that were going through, and it was going to 5 individuals in Lagos, Nigeria. Um,
Mhm.
the main scammer that was involved, his cryptocurrency wallets matched the social media accounts that I found online, because these guys always leave their social media for us to find. And I could see that, yeah, this guy was the one who was communicating with her. And it was so bad on a victim scale that when I approached her, I'm like, you don't understand. You're sending money to a scammer. You called
Mhm.
me for a reason. You know it's a scam. So she said, well, I just want to see his photos. And come to find out, she had called him out for being a scammer, and he had admitted it and started sending her photos of himself. They were just edited photos, editing out license plates and everything that were in the photos. And I told her, well, if you want these photos, here's his Instagram. It's the unedited ones with the license plate visible. It's the same photos that you've been paying for. Um, and eh, she eventually came around, and understood that the impact was devastating on her. And to this day, she's still struggling. I check in on her every couple of weeks just to make sure, but
Gosh,
it's
Brian, it sounds
something.
like you have such a passion for supporting folks who have been impacted by this.
Yeah, definitely.
To me, that sounds unusual for somebody in your position who's probably extremely busy, has a lot on his plate, to then continue to reach out and support victims after the fact. That tells me you really care and you have a big heart for the work that you do.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, sure, it eats up time. I mean, my queue for files is quite heavy, but at the end of the day, if I can take 10 minutes out of my day to call somebody and just check in on them, that might make the difference between, them continuing to get into a depressive situation, or actually being able to push forward out of this, because it's traumatic for people, and
Mhm. And I
that's
suppose
something we
you're
need more.
probably recommending to anybody who's been impacted by a scam, to talk to family and friends, to get, support from, seek help from a professional, mental health professional if required, because these things can be so far reaching into our personal lives, these types of scams.
Yep, absolutely. The biggest thing is talk about it. It's not shameful. And any individual who wants to shame a victim and blame the victim, they're not thinking.
Mhm.
and they don't know what it's actually like to be embedded in these scams. I mean, I scroll through the chats all the time of people who have been scammed, and I look through them like this is convincing.
Yeah.
I look at the wording and I'd say, "Oh, no, this is convincing." The only reason that I know it's a scam is that I work in the industry. If I
And
wasn't
we
working
know
in the
that
industry,
victims
it's possible.
We know that victims can be anyone from CEOs to even security professionals to, so it really, they can target anyone, and anybody can be impacted. Anybody
Yep.
can be the victim of a scam regardless. And I think there is that false perception that, oh, you're maybe a bit more gullible or, oh, this or that. But it's really not true. I would say anybody's liable to be a victim of a scam.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know police officers who have fallen victims to scams. I know prosecutors that have fallen victim to scams, and it's not because they're dumb. It's not because they were greedy. Um, those two things that people often attribute to scams is wrong. You're not dumb. You just got manipulated by a master manipulator, and it wasn't greed. And this is a term that really bothers me when people talk about fraud. It's not greed; it's need.
Mhm.
Look at the global economy that we have right now. What are people struggling with? They're struggling with rent, mortgage, grocery prices. They need money to try and survive. So what do? They try looking out. They look for other sources that they can pull that in so that they can live a comfortable life.
And
That's
here are
all they
cyber
want.
criminals potentially presenting them with an added income stream or an added way to make more money. And so it's very enticing. We can all see and empathize with how that happens.
Yeah,
So
that's
Brian, one last question is, if viewers remember only one thing from this conversation, what would you want them to know about online scams and or working with law enforcement? What would be your key takeaway?
one of the key takeaways for people is, I guess, two prongs here. One is stop, think, ask, wait, and collaborate. If you see something, stop for a second. Is it too good to be true?
Mhm,
Because as the old adage says, if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
mhm.
So stop and think about it. Ask other people around you. Talk to your friends and family. Say, hey, I saw this. What do you think about it? Wait on it a little bit so that you can go back to stop and think, and then collaborate with your loved ones, with friends and everything to see, okay, is this something that's actually legitimate?
Mhm.
Because a scammer, on the other hand, is going to be pushing you to say, hey, you need to do this now. They're acting on that sense of urgency. If it can't wait 12 hours, it's probably a scam.
Mhm.
The other thing is that don't feel ashamed that if you are the victim of a scam, report to us, report to IC3, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center. We need to know about it. We're not going to shame you for being a victim of a scam. 9 times out of 10, we find that people are who are victims of a scam won't report it to us. Uh, the big Ponzi scheme that we did a press release on a couple of weeks ago, we had over 600 victims Canada wide on that scam. We had maybe 8 people who had reported it.
So
Everyone else
there
knew
is
it
a
was
lot of underreporting, yeah. And statistically,
scary.
we know that that's an issue.
Mhm.
So definitely you're saying have that big pause, talk to people around you who love you and care about you, and get a second pair of eyes and ears on the situation. And if something happens, don't hesitate. Go and report.
Yep, yep, that's right. You're not going to get in trouble for filing a police report. Um, we're not gonna shame you. Even if there's nothing that can ultimately be done about that scam, at least we know the trends that are developing, because maybe down the road there is something that we can do about it, and maybe your report is pivotal in a couple of little data points.
Mhm. That's really wonderful to know. Brian, we appreciate so much that you've taken time out of your apparently very busy schedule and all the wonderful work that you do to come and speak with us here on this spotlight session. And we're really grateful for you to share those insights with us and give us a little peek behind the curtain of what's going on from a law enforcement standpoint. We can also appreciate that there's a lot of challenges that you're facing to do this work and do right by these victims. So thank you for the work that you do. And we are, for those who have tuned in and listened, we're really grateful that you've joined us. Hopefully you've got some good takeaways from today. And please note that we'll be having some more sessions. Our next one will be on the 7th of May. And we're actually going to be talking to CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center. And so another important conversation will take place then, and we would look forward to having you listen in on our next session. Brian, any other parting words before we end?
No, I can't think of anything. It's been a pleasure.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much. And thank you everybody for joining. We'll see you next time. Take care.